Hello, everybody. This is Danny. I make all types of YouTube videos. Today, I'm doing another chess video, and I don't want to give any of it away. I don't want to give out spoilers, and it's very easy to give out spoilers, which I personally hate. All the information I'll write down in the wording of this YouTube video. So let's just get right into it. So in this game, the computer is the white pieces, and I myself I'm playing with the black pieces. And um, this game um, has already been played, but because this is a chess program, I'm able to document everything. So I'm just going to go through the game that has already been played. And again, I'm playing with the black pieces, and I'm playing against the computer program, which has the white pieces. I also just wanted to say, just before I forget, that I've included the sound effects that this chess program has, because I think it's much better with the sound effects. So you're about to hear the pieces move and stuff, the sounds of the pieces, and also the background noise. You're hearing like cars and air conditioning sounds and so forth. That's all due to sounds that are created by the chess program. So let's get right into it. So the computer moves knight to f3. I move knight to f6. I think sometimes it's a good idea to not commit too early. And I played knight to f6 because it's good to see what your opponent is really going to do first. And once you know what your opponent is doing first, then you can create a plan against it. So the computer moves c4. Okay, so um, when the move c4 is played, that denotes that this is the English opening. Okay, generally speaking, the English opening is described when c4 is played. The fact that um, knight f3 was already played before doesn't really matter. Um, doesn't the move order doesn't matter. So I play c6. So the reason that um, I'm playing c6 for a reason, and you'll know when I make the next move. So the computer moves d4, and then I move d5, right? So c6 is just a preparation for d5. So this is also basically the Slav defense, right? Um, this is basically the Slav defense, but I'm still going to um, call White's chess opening the English opening because he played c4. Um, that's more accurately described. This game would be more accurately described as White playing the English opening, even though it's sort of transposed or transitioned into the Slav defense. Okay, so like I said, um, yeah, so here we're sort of at the Slav defense. Okay, so the computer moves knight to c3. And then I move bishop to g4, attacking White's knight. And then the computer moves queen to b3. That's a good move because it does two things. It attacks my pawn on b7. At the same time, he's able to develop his queen to a pretty good square. So I respond to that by moving my queen to d7. So I'm able to protect my pawn on b7, and also at the same time, I'm able to protect my other pawn on d5. It's not the greatest move because my knight on b8 is sort of shut in, but I have no choice. So the computer moves c5, trying to gain more space on the queen side. And then my bishop takes his knight on f3 because I feel that's a good move because it's forcing him to double up his pawns, which is not good for him. And the computer takes it with his g pawn. And then I move g6. I'm preparing to fianchetto my bishop. And the computer moves e4, attacking the center. I fianchetto my bishop to g7. The computer develops their bishop to e3. I castle. The computer castles, I guess you would call that a long castle, or long castle, queen castle. And then I move my queen to c7. I'm trying to remember why I moved there. Okay, I moved my queen to c7 because I'm preparing to. I want to get my knight on b8 is not developed, and so I need to free up space so that knight can move to d7 where the queen was. And the computer moves h4, so he's planning some sort of attack maybe. on the king side. And like I said, I developed my knight to d7. And the computer pushes their pawn further to h5. Okay. So I push my pawn to e6. So basically now this is an interesting move because computer the computer's knight takes d5 and the computer is sacrificing that knight. So I take that knight with my pawn. So I just wanted to say that the reason it seems that the computer sacrificed that knight is to gain a little more space in the center. So I might have said it before, but the computer moves their pawn further to h6. I have no choice. I have to move my bishop back to h8. And then the computer moves their pawn to e5, gaining more space in the center, like I said. And I forgot to also say that the computer is also attacking that knight. And so I move my knight to safety to h5. That's the best I can do because now the computer's pawn on h6 is very vulnerable. It's not being protected by that rook on h1 anymore. And then the computer pushes their pawn to f4, providing a little more support to their center, the center that he already has. And then I move my pawn to f6. Now the reason that I move my pawn to f6 is because my bishop on h8 is almost completely blocked in, which is bad. And so I desperately need to open up the position to free up my bishop. So so that's why I pushed my pawn to f6. And just wanted to, I don't really have that fancy computer stuff with arrows and stuff, but I do have a laser pointer. My laser pointer is red, and sometimes it doesn't work all that great, but I'm going to try and see how well it works. So just look for the red dot. And so if you see, if you can just see the red dot, that's how I emphasize certain things. So if you can see, for example, if you look, for example, on the square on D8, that dark square, you can see that red dot right there. That's what that red dot looks like. And so I was just saying that that bishop was stuck in there. But by myself moving my pawn to f6, it's sort of just trying to free up so that this, like I said, so that my bishop can open up and get back into the game, so that that diagonal can hopefully be opened up here. And then the computer pushes their pawn to f5. Kind of, it seems like they're just trying to attack my king side a little more. And then my pawn takes the computer's pawn on e5. Exactly like I said before, I'm trying to free up some squares for my bishop. And then the computer moves their rook to h2. So I must confess that since I've played this, I've analyzed the game on my own and trying to come up with, reasons or logical reasons as to why I made certain moves or why the computer made certain moves. And after analyzing this move that the computer made of rook to h2, I cannot make sense of why. The bottom line is that there's no real reason why the computer needed to move their rook to h2. It's just a blunder, right? Because their pawn on f2, it's not really a threat, right? Because if, for example, my rook on f8 were to eat the computer's pawn on f5, and then later on threaten that pawn on f2. However, that pawn is still very sound. It's being protected presently by the bishop here on f3. If it needed to, you could just go up one square to f3, and then this bishop, the bishop on f1 could just slide over to f2 to protect that pawn. So, it's like I said, for the computer to move the rook to h2, there's no sense in it. And so my pawn takes their pawn on d4. So really the main reason really that I did that is to free up more squares for my bishop on h8, like I said before. But now it's just very convenient because it's like I have a double attack, right? It's opened up the fact that my queen is attacking their rook on h2, which is just hanging there. And also my pawn on d4 is attacking their bishop on f3. So the computer's pawn decides that their pawn should take my pawn on g6. So I decide that my queen should take their rook on h2. And the computer here decides that their pawn the computer decides that their pawn, um, the computer decides that I just want to make sure that that I didn't make a mistake. I'll rewind it. Yeah. The computer decides that their pawn should take my pawn on h7, putting me in check. Now, after analyzing that move, it was a really that was that was just a really bad move, and I'm going to explain why right now. Okay, so like I said, I was just going to explain sort of a pivotal moment in the game, and just try to analyze it a little bit. Every once in a while, I do this because I think that chess is actually a board game, and so it's important to stick to the roots of what chess is. It's basically a board game, and I don't like it when people get so caught up with the computer and the technology and then the engines and all of that type of thing. So every once in a while, I like it to take it back to what chess is, just a board game. So that's why I'll bring out my chessboard and bring it back to that every once in a while. So so as I was saying, so this is the position that we left off. This is the position that we left off as, and if you remember, um, so I was saying that in the position that we left off at, um, if we remember, I'll try to use my stick instead of the laser pointer because I think in this instance the stick will work better. So in my previous move, my queen, um, which was um, if I remember right, my my queen was probably on c7, around c7, if not that. And so my queen came over and captured the computer's rook on h2, and um, and then the computer decided to take their pawn and capture. Okay. So I was just saying that why is that a bad move, right? Because remember, in my queen capturing the rook, I'm a rook up, right? So instead of that, the computer should have moved this, right? So in doing so, that forks that forks my bishop on h8 and also my rook on f8, right? So let's just say if the computer did decide to move their pawn and fork these two pieces, well, I mean, I would definitely move my rook away, right? Um, I would definitely move my rook away, but then um, I would definitely move my rook away, but then the pawn would end up taking my rook. Sorry, I would move my rook away from that fork, and then their pawn would therefore capture my bishop on h8. So there would be damage control, right? So the rook that I captured with my queen on h2, so that would be an exchange of um, a rook versus a bishop, which isn't really that bad, right? But um, once eventually their pawn here on g7, like once it eventually captures um, my bishop, therefore putting me in check, um, I basically would take my queen on g8 and capture that pawn on h8. So the exchange would be um, I would have their rook plus one pawn, and they would have my bishop. So not that bad, but not that bad, right? The material is still in my favor, but it's not too lopsided, right? Um, but in but when the computer decided for some reason to capture this, right? Um, we will see that um, it doesn't enable the computer to fork and win more material, right? Um, Therefore, the game just completely goes really in my favor, in a winning favor. And so yeah, and so I'll bring it back to the computer in just 1 second. And I'm just going to just get one last shot of this board, so you guys can, so we can all just have visual aspect of what the actual board looks like. Okay, so we're back to the computer, and um, so like I said, the computer's pawn takes my pawn, just so that you can just sort of see that again, just in case you kind of forgot. So the computer's pawn takes my pawn on h7, puts me in check. And then my computer takes their pawn on h7. Their bishop moves to d3, puts me in check. I move my king to g8, getting out of check. And then the computer's queen moves to b5. Now, this is, it seems to be another mistake that, well, maybe not yet, actually. We'll see what the next moves are. So let's see that again. So my pawn takes out their bishop on e3. So remember now, like previously, I my queen took their rook, so I'm ahead of rook, and now I'm ahead of bishop, right? So the problem here is that the computer moves their queen to b5, hoping that it could attack and therefore eat my knight on d7. However, it cannot do that because what if the queen takes my knight on d7 right now? I believe that my queen on h2 takes their pawn on f2, and I think that there's a mate on when my queen takes their pawn on b2. I believe so. So let me just recalculate that quickly. So if their queen took my knight here on d7, then my queen would take that pawn on f2. If he brought that queen back to b5, protecting b2, therefore it wouldn't be checkmate. Yeah. I'm not too sure actually if looking at that if his queen took my knight on d7, I'm not sure that it would be a checkmate for me if my queen took f2, because his queen could come back to b5. Oh, yeah. But then so I was just saying that I was trying to see whether or not that at this point his queen could capture my knight on d7. Because if his queen captured my knight on d7, right, my queen takes his pawn on f2, then he can move his queen back to b5, right? Therefore, I'm not able to checkmate him on b2. Mm-hmm. And there's no mating. Yeah, I'm not at this point. I'm not able. I wouldn't. So it seems like that if he could take my at this point he could take my knight on d7, and then I wouldn't be able to checkmate him. But he instead decides to move his pawn ahead to h7, putting me in check. So I move my king to f7. And then he moves his rook to f1. So as I previously said, I think that was another mistake that the computer made, because at this point, um, the computer could have just eaten my knight with their queen on d7, putting me in check. Then I would have to do something about the check. And then in the meantime, even if my queen did take their pawn on f2, um, the queen would still have enough time to get back to b5 and protect b2 from the mate. And if I look back at where that yeah. So I'd really like to try to figure this out now, whether or not he could have just taken my knight with his queen on d7. Because if his queen took my knight on d7, right, then my queen my queen takes the pawn on f2, right? Then his queen moves back to b5 to protect the mate on b2, right? Yeah. And there's no other square that I can mate him on, because c2 is protected by the bishop. d2 is protected by the d2 is, and d2. I can't mate him on d2 because that I can't mate him on d2 with my queen because that rook is protecting it. So I don't understand why at this point that the queen just didn't take my knight. And so the rook decides to move to, like I said, f1, which doesn't really make sense. And then so here my knight takes c5. That's a good move because I'm winning a pawn, and I'm also protecting b7, and that knight is no longer hanging. So here the computer decides to take decides to take e3 with their pawn, put me in check. So I move my knight to f6, getting rid of the check. And then they put their bishop, the computer puts their bishop to c2, right? I think there's possibilities, like I said, of a checkmate by putting the bishop there. It sort of blocks a possible checkmate on b2. And then I move my rook on a to c8. So I'm targeting that c file, and I'm targeting that bishop and the king. Then the king moves to d1. just avoiding checkmate possibilities. And I move my knight to e4. So this is really the best possible move because, like, to have one of my knights um, on e4 is just a fantastic place for one of my knights because right now, as you can see, I'm threatening checkmate on d2, right? Um, Ideally, it would have been nicer, a little nicer, if I could have occupied e4 with my other knight, right? With my other knight. With my other knight, I was just saying that ideally I would have liked to occupy e4 with my other knight, the knight on f6, right? Um, because that frees up the diagonal for my bishop on h8, which is still targeting b2, right? And there's checkmate possibilities there. But the problem with that is that um, if I wanted to, if I decided that I wanted to occupy e4 with my knight on f6, remember it's pinned. It's pinned because of my king, right? And that rook on f1. So I would lose a tempo because I would first have to move my king to get outside of that pin, to get outside of that pin, right? And so that would I would end up wasting one more move. And at this point, I don't want to be wasting moves because I'm pretty close to threatening checkmate and therefore winning material, right? And so this is a better move, and I'll for another reason, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. So my knight, like I said, moves to e4, and so as I said before, I'm threatening checkmate on d2 with my queen, right? Um, and if I'm analyzing this position now, right, of a possible checkmate on d2 with my queen, um, I'm not sure actually if it's possible um, for him to even get out of that possible checkmate if he didn't kill my knight on e4, right? Because let's just say, for example, let's just walk through that a little bit. If he eventually did let my queen go to, um, if he didn't take my knight, right? Um, Moving his queen to, let's just say, a5 wouldn't do anything because then I would just take it. I would just take it as the exchange on d2, and his rook is just useless. And so he could possibly move his king at this point to c1. So if he moved his king right now to c1, if he moved his king right now to c1, and then my queen went to d2, put him in check, then he would have to move to um, b b2. His king would have to move to b1. Yeah, and then my queen would take his bishop on c2, and there's an eventual mate there somehow, because then my knight here on f6 just has to move, and that frees up the long diagonal for my bishop. And so I think at this point, this move here that he does now, he had to do that to avoid a possible checkmate. So his bishop takes my knight on e4. But why is that? Why does that really work in my favor? Because look what happens now is my pawn takes that piece on e4, and look how it completely opens up the d file, right? Look at how it completely opens up that d file. And I have a rook on f8 that's ready, just waiting to go to d8 and take advantage of that d file and possibly checkmate him, right? So the computer moves their queen to d7, puts me in check. It's kind of like an act of desperation, just forcing me to do things, right? But in reality, it's just putting him into a lot of trouble, because look at how at this point his queen is on the same file. His queen is on the same file as his queen is on the same file as the king on that d file. And remember, I have two rooks just waiting to go, right? So he puts me in check just out of desperation. And so I move my king to g6. And here he moves his queen to d2. And that is also another act of desperation, because had he not done that, there would have been an eventual checkmate, because if you look at my rook on c8, it owns that whole c file, right? And I'll just show you why. I'll just give you one example of. I think there's different possibilities for me to have checkmated him one way, but one way is if I would have moved my rook, so that my rook that's on c8, if it moves to c2, right? So if it moves to c2, then I'm threatening mate on e2 with my queen, and possibly at some point d2. And so let's just analyze that a bit. If I moved my rook to c2, so I'm threatening mate on f2 with my queen, right? So he could possibly move his rook to d1. Yeah, I think at this point there's just so many different possibilities that I could have checkmated him there. So I think that one of the only ways for him to avoid being checkmated is to move to d2 and just hope that I exchange it, right? But I move my rook to d8. So therefore, that move basically wins his queen. And then he just moves his queen to d4 so that he just doesn't lose it completely. And then my rook takes his queen on d4, puts him in check. His pawn takes my rook on d4. My king takes his pawn on h7. The computer moves pawn to b4. My queen takes a2. His rook goes to h1, puts me in check. I move my king to g8. Computer moves his rook to g1, putting me in check. I move my king to f7. So here he sacrifices his rook to g7, putting me in check, hoping for an eventual stalemate. So my bishop takes their rook on g7. So the computer moves pawn to d5. My pawn takes their pawn on d5. The computer moves their pawn to b5. I move my rook to h8. Computer moves their king to c1. And I decide to move a6. Of course, I could have checkmated him previous to that just by moving my rook on h8 to h1. But I was just curious to see how the artificial intelligence works, if it's a program that just keeps trying to fight right until the end, or if it just quits. Like I said previously, when it sacrificed its rook, it was just trying to go for a stalemate. And then here, I forget. Let me just replay that. So my pawn moves up to a6. Their pawn takes my pawn on a6. My pawn takes their pawn on a6. Computer's king goes to d1. And I eventually end the game here. I end the game here by checkmating him by moving my rook, which is on h8, to h1. So that's the game. So I'm just going to wrap this up. I don't want this to be any longer than it should. And so, like I said, there was a lot of possibilities. Lots of checkmate possibilities, which would lead to huge rewards in me winning a lot of material. Um, I did go through, and the video went on a little longer because I tried to go through a lot of those, but there were probably more that I could have went through. So I just want to finish this video off and say thanks for watching this YouTube video. Thanks for watching all of my YouTube videos. And basically, I didn't want to say this at the beginning because I didn't want to give out any spoilers. But the way it's going to work basically is that for this chess program, there's only 12 levels. And for these last levels, I've been, well, maybe I sh- maybe maybe I shouldn't really say this now because in saying this, I may end up kind of giving things away and giving you spoilers, right? Because everything here will be written down on the information in the YouTube video, anyways. So just make sure that you hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you hit all notifications so that you know exactly when I post a new video. And really, for me, everyone is different, but every YouTuber is different. But I count my how big my subscription number goes up. If I see that subscription number grow up and grow, that's telling me that people are interested and that therefore I should be motivated to make more videos so that I know that people will watch them. So if you really want to make me if you really want to see more of these videos, or yeah, if you really want to see more of these videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Peace out.